taking years to write a book is so last century. Hi, I'm Liesl Hill. I help aspiring authors move toward their dreams of career authordom by mastering their story, mastering their words, and mastering their marketing. If you're ready to put your head down and do the work necessary to eventually live off your fiction royalties, then tune in each week. I'll give you actionable tips and hacks, as well as inspiring interviews with writers who are already doing this. We are prolific authors. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Prolific Author Podcast, where we talk about all things having to do with creating a sustainable author business. Today, I have a really fun interview for you with Amanda Warne, who is a fantasy author. So she's kind of a gal after my own heart. I write high fantasy too, and we had a really fun talk, and she's got a lot of real gems that I'm excited for you guys to hear. Before we do that, though, let's take care of some housekeeping. First of all, I want to apologize for my last podcast, which had a lot of microphone feedback on it. I'm so sorry about that. I didn't even realize it when I posted it, or I would have tried to fix that. I haven't decided if I'm going to go back and re-record that or not. I need to listen to the whole thing and see how bad it is. So I don't know. I might re-record it this weekend. And replace it, but that had a lot of downloads, so I'm kind of loath to actually just take it down. So yeah, if you're listening to this way later and after it was posted and there's no feedback there, then that probably means I re-recorded it. And if it is there, then I decided not to. I just haven't actually made a decision yet. I have this microphone that it's supposed to be a nicer microphone. It's not super expensive. It's kind of middle of the road, but it's, it's a nicer-ish microphone, but seriously, every time I use it, something like that happens. So obviously, I need to invest in a new microphone, maybe for Christmas. So yeah, anyway, sorry about that if that was difficult to hear. You can always check out the show notes, though, and I think they have all the resources in them. Beyond that, I don't have too much of an update. I'm still working on the same things that I was before, finishing up a couple of books and putting, some finishing touches on my writing course. Pretty much same old. We're just kind of getting through the end of 2020 here. Remember, if you haven't downloaded my freebie, it is the Ultimate Villainy Checklist, which tells you what kind of traits and functions your villain should have in your story to make sure that he or she is unforgettable. I've had people asking me about the old freebie that I used to do, which was my 9 essential plot points that I use to plot out every single one of my stories. That is still available. So the 9 essential plot points is at bit.ly/9 plot points, the number 9 and then spelled out plot points. And the villainy checklist is at bit.ly/villain checklist. And I will have both of those links in the show notes if you ever want them. Okay, so make sure and grab those. They are free to download. Remember that if you are interested in working with me and helping you to reach your author goals, I coach authors through every stage of the journey. So from the concept and the writing, putting everything you need to create a bestseller purposefully into your book, and the somewhat of the editing, at least what you need to do. I don't actually edit, but and then of course also marketing and daily writing habit and all of that, so that you can really within 90 days create a system that works for you so that you can get a book done every 90 days and once again create a sustainable author business. So if you're at all interested in hopping on a call with me, you can do that at the Calendly link in the show notes and get on a free call so that we can just kind of talk about it and discuss whether we would be a good fit or not. Make sure and join our free Facebook group, The Prolific Author. You can just search that on Facebook. And finally, whatever platform you're listening to this on, make sure and subscribe so that you do not miss any future training videos or interviews. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have today. And let's hop right into the interview with Amanda.
Okay, I think we're recording. All right. So, hi, Amanda. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And you are in Australia, right? We were just talking about how early it is for you there.
Yeah, it's the sun still hasn't come up.
Well, thanks for getting up early for us. It's like mid-morning for me, so it's, I'm good. But you had to get up kind of early for this.
Yep, no, I would love to be here. Thank you so much
for having me. Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to have you. So why don't you start by just introducing yourself and, who you are and what you do and what you write.
So I'm A.A. Warne, but you can call me Amanda. I write speculative fiction for both children and adults. So I have my latest release is The Reluctant Wizard, and I've got a copy right here. No, that's not that one. I'll grab one out in a sec. I've got The Heavy Dirty Soul. I've got Concealed Power, and I publish anthologies. So I've got 12 amazing authors. Last year was the Christmas fantasy, so it was about Christmas and fantasy, and I wrote a story about Franken-Santa, so I pushed Frankenstein's monster into Santa Claus. This year we've got the Magic and Fire, and so it's really exploring magic and fire, the themes.
Wow, those sound like really a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you know what, we just, it's such a great community, and I wanted us to all kind of showcase our work together. So I just said, you know what, let's write anthologies, and I throw some themes at them each year, and they come back with some amazing stories. And it's really odd to see how fantasy writers work, because you get one theme, but it's interpreted in so many different ways, and you think,
right.
Mind blows each time I read a story, because you know, maybe they'll be too similar, but they're not. Each story you go through in the book, it's like a totally different world. Yeah, so I'm really enjoying the anthology, so I think it definitely will be a yearly thing.
Oh, good. So are those anthologies, are they geared toward more children's lit or toward adult?
No, they're definitely more towards adults, but
okay.
Readers from like 12, 13 could definitely dive into them. We don't do things like erotica or heavy romance, because fantasy readers don't want that. If romance goes into fantasy, it has to have a purpose, it has to have a meaning, it has to drive the plot forward. And so we're very conscious of diving into that genre. So there is like themes of war, but it's not too graphic. It just really explores these fantastical worlds.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like those are great. So if anybody is writing in that genre and wants to maybe be included in one of your anthologies, how would they do that?
Oh, so just reach out to me through my website. I don't put a call out at the moment, because we're a very close-knit group, and then I just kind of vet each person who approaches me, and it's more community-minded based. So it's not a lot of anthologies call out for money and then just throw me a story and I'll publish it and all this. It's not like that. It's you know, we have stages. We do all of the editing process in the book. So I sometimes I work as a structural editor as well. So I structurally edit each story with feedback. Give each other feedback. So beta readers, and then we have this amazing writer, editor who comes on board, and she does the final edit. So when we're coming back, when we get the themes and I show the cover and say, okay, this is what we're working with next year, just in our little Facebook group, you can see how everybody's supporting one another and like trying to help each other get through to those tricky twists in the ending, and how do we get it into 5,000 words, because that's the hard part, you know, we're all writing stories at the 100,000 words. Now we've got 5,000 theme to get through, and yeah, the world's massive, the characters are diverse, and it's I find that if we can work on a formula base, so you throw straight into the action, and you know, how are we going to end this action, how are we going to come to a resolution, so because there's not a lot of words to get through. But I'm finding that the readers are like, oh my God, this has to be a whole novel. How did you do that in this short space? So we're getting there where a lot of people are going, you know what, I have to write a novel now on this story. So that's exciting. And so there might be a lot of long novels eventually, but at the moment, these are just teaser stories.
Yeah, that's definitely a skill. And I think it's harder for, like you said, like for high fantasy writers who tend to be super long-winded. I'm exactly that way. And it's hard for me to write short stories. I've done it a few times, but mine are usually more like 7,000 to 8,000. I have a hard time getting it below that, you know? So I feel you there for sure.
And,
but it's,
even like originally we had 8,000 word count, and we were finding people were diving in and to be the long-winded, and that's why we cut it down. We're like, no, you need to get to the guts of the story.
Right.
You don't want to let people dive in and then stay in that world before we have to jump into the next story. So yeah, we found 5,000 is like that sweet spot of, wow, my mind's blown. Okay, now what's the next story?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good exercise for writers to do, even if they're not in an anthology or not publishing it, just to force yourself to cut. It'll just make your writing tighter if you do that.
It is. And I'm noticing now, like, originally before we started the anthologies, you know, I was reading the writers' work and I'm like, yep, they're fantastic writers. But then I've put all these challenges on them to improve the writing, and it's nothing against them. It's like, let's get this to be the best story we possibly can get. And now I'm reading their stories and thinking, wait, you're not the same writer.
Right.
Yeah, and even I'm not the same writer. I'm finding each book I'm just leapfrogging, going up and up and up, thinking, and I read back some of the stuff, I'm thinking, who wrote this? So it's a wonderful way to just push our, even as a collective, our writing techniques. Loving it. Yeah, I'm so glad that I did this. I was thinking, how am I going to put all this work on top of what I already do? And I'm like, no, I don't care. Everything goes to those anthologies now.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking it probably functions a little bit like a, what would you call that? Like an immersive mastermind. You know what I mean? You can get a certain amount of skill and experience by just writing one book after another, of course. But if you really immerse yourself and really hardcore go at it like that and focus, you just kind of grow by leaps and bounds. You know, it probably has a similar effect on writers to do that.
Definitely. And I felt like I'm a little bit more hands-on. Like, everyone else gets to beta read each other, and that's totally optional. We don't put anything on people to do that. So it's nice to have feedback from all different perspectives. But I come in and I'm like, this, and like sometimes I change the structure or and everything again is optional. If they don't want to apply that, they don't have to. But sometimes you've got like this, they open arcs and they don't close them, and they're like, oh no, it's like, you got to close this arc, you got to wrap it up and put it in, or even if you twist it in. And I give examples on how to do that, because I'm structurally, I can see the story, I can see what's working and what needs to be fixed up. And so I kind of look like I'm the full-on person who goes all of this, and but in the end, if you apply it all, it just, the story takes this big leap. But then I've got to do 12 stories.
Right.
Yeah. And
it's a lot of work,
I'll be to read 3 and I'll be to read 4. And I'm like, that's great, okay. And then I get all these feedback and I'm like, I'm at 12.
Yeah.
So by the time we get to publication date, I'm a bit like, you know, a bit cross-eyed. So I'm not only a structural editor, I'm also publisher. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you do the most work, but you probably grow the most from it because you read the most stories, you know?
Yeah, and I think that really shows in my latest release, in The Reluctant Wizard. So I find that I'm doing less editing process. Like, Heavy Dirty Soul went through so many editing processes, and I'm like, surely it can't be this hard to write a book. And I think I had 4 editors in the end, and one of the reasons why I didn't really find the right editor for me. So now with The Reluctant Wizard, I had 1 editing round, but I've got an amazing editor, and it was just, I threw her the book in sections, and then it comes back and I rework it, and she reread it. She goes, no, great. And it was fantastic. And I'm finding that I'm doing less editing stages. I'm thinking different. I write differently. I don't rewrite as much, even though I still rewrite like 5 times. I just don't rewrite like 30 times. And I'm finding that, you know, it's really starting to shine, and I've got to that point where, you know, when a writer goes, oh, okay, everything's clicking now. It's just, it's an easier process. My process is a bit stupid in overall though, because I tend to write 4 or 5 books at a time, and I'm researching 6 or 7 books. Like, my head's just all over the place. probably that's why this looks all over the place. But yeah, like when I present a book, it's becoming more received and more enjoyable, and people are like, oh my God, give me the next book. I'm like, wait, it's not right. Just wait for the date. I set dates that they're fine. So yeah, stick to dates. I can do that. But when people go, what's going to be in the next book? I'm like, no, don't ask me that. I just can't comprehend. Yeah.
Well, I mean, your writing process, it's not stupid. It's what works for you, and everybody's writing process is different. So as long as you're getting the books out there, it doesn't really matter how it happens.
Yeah, and when I was telling some other writers and big publishers and people like, what do I do? Like, I'm researching all these big stories that aren't coming out for another 2 years, but I'm writing everything that's coming out next year, and I've got all of these books coming out. And they're like, no, you have to write one book at a time. Stick to one book at a time. And I'm like, really? I'm doing this wrong? Okay, all right. And so I got rid of all the noise, and I was like, right, one book at a time. And then I stopped writing, and I stopped reading, and I stopped researching. I even stopped cleaning my house, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? And it felt like I put handcuffs on my wrists, and I was stuck. It just completely freezed my creative mojo, really. So in the end, I was like, no, I physically can't write one book at a time. So I let all the ideas come. I just accept it. I lean into it. And I've got folders full of research, and then I'm like, oh, this is a perfect idea. Quick, jot that down, stick it into another folder. And I'm finding that the more ideas come to me, even if they're not necessarily a whole book idea, but I might have 3 or 4 book ideas that eventually become one. So I just kind of let my brain do what it needs to do, and I accept it, and I lean into it. And when people go, that's a crazy creative process, and I'm like, yes, it is. And
and you probably love it, right?
I do love it now, but before, when I was letting people influence me, I was like, no, I should write one book at a time. No, that's a process for them, not me.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. We need to lean into our strengths and just accept however we write, and not try to make it what other people want it to be,
Yeah. And I find, like, science only knows so much of the brain. They wouldn't want to pick my brain apart. Like I'll overwhelm them. And so when people tell other people, this is what you have to do, it just, no. You have to understand everybody's brain is different.
Right.
We can't understand it from science perspective. Just understand your own brain.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a lot like you. I tend to work on, I write several different genres, and I tend to work on multiple books at a time. And yeah, that sounds really familiar. Everything you do, I do to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think it's a fantasy thing, isn't it?
It might be, that's true. Fantasy has lots of characters and lots of worlds and lots of world buildings. Maybe it's just the way we're built, really, really eclectic brains doing 30 things at a time. So we want to write fantasy,
Yeah, that's right. And it's more like the macro down into the micro. So, one day we're looking at what made that road in the different types of minerals, and and other times we're looking at how to build foundations for a whole castle or something like that, something massive, and how does the weather system work, and then the structure of the story, and all sorts of things. Like, you have to be in all different types of mind and able to apply fantasy. It's not a moment by moment thing. So, where other genres, I think they can get away with it a little bit more, like, the crime thrillers. It's about picking apart the bits and pieces, but you don't have to worry about the structure of the weather.
Right.
Movement of the planet and things like that, where we have to, sometimes I think about the movement of the planet before, and the way that the sun is positioned, before I can even think about what's going on in the ground roots. So yeah, so I guess it just depends on how you think, really, and your perception of what the story needs to be.
Right. So let me ask you this: do you write in first person at all, or do you do third person?
So I'm third person limited.
Okay.
So yeah, and I would love to be able to jump and do ombudsman, but I do third person limited, and there are quite a lot of my books, especially Conceal Power, where I jump character per chapter. I think actually Conceal Power, we end up losing all the chapters and you jump characters within the chapter. So you get three characters from 3 different points within one chapter, and then you move again to the next chapter. They weren't long enough to have their own chapters unless you wanted, like, I don't know, 200 chapters. So yeah, and then I have other books that aren't released yet that I don't give one character one chapter and then move on to the next. So but I really focus in on that one character really close. I also write from their thoughts as well. I italicize their inner thoughts, so you are jumping having this dialogue with the reader, and it's not breaking the fourth wall. We're just jumping in, and he's thinking to himself, and we get that viewpoint.
Yeah.
But it kind of becomes a dialogue, especially when he's pulling in the Reluctant Wizard. Eli kind of looks at the world, and he's assessing the world, and he's kind of like not happy with the world. And when something happens later on in the book, he goes, "Oh my God, that reminds me of this," and it kind of pulls things in full circle, really. I really like. I think I really fell into third person limited naturally. And especially like with the anthology that's coming up, I wrote a story called The Masters of Fire, and there's 2 brothers, and they're heading towards this kingdom to rescue these last lot of brotherhood, the masters, and from this mad king, but you don't understand which one is the person, like, because it's coming from both perspectives at the same time. And I kind of like play on that. I'm like, well, who's on who, and who's the main character here, and who are we going to root for to come into the last lot of conflict? And so I don't actually jump into their minds, and you can't see what they're thinking. So it's a really different process for me, where I really love to see what people are thinking, because it really shows the perception and how they're viewing the world. So, you know, when I present a world and the characters are walking through and they're interacting with this world, you know, you get this assumption that they're thinking this, or they're feeling this, or they're about to do this, but then you jump into their mind and they're thinking something completely different.
Right.
And you can see them being like a smart ass, but they've got this pure mask. Yeah, it really just breaks down a story. And it always makes me question in real life, you know, I'm having this conversation for somebody and I'm feeling like they're involved, but my gut instinct tells me something completely different. And I'm standing there trying to assess the situation going, okay, I should reply like this, but I feel like I should reply something else. Yeah. So I really kind of question the motives of characters, and exactly, you know, just because you're presenting yourself like this, is that what you're actually thinking? So that's why I'm in third person limited. So I stay out here. I use those different camera angles to really zoom in and get everything. But at the same time, I get to see what's going on in here.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And one of the reasons I asked, because we were talking about how people who write fantasy want to come from all different angles. I actually think it's harder for us to write first person, because I'm the same way. I always write third person, usually limited. And I don't know if I just get bored with it, or I feel like it's almost there's too many blinders on, because you're just seeing from that one person's point of view. And that's great, but I want to see it from everybody's point of view. So I'm kind of the same way. And I think that's something that's, by genre, if you are writing a story in a different genre that doesn't necessarily need that, then I was thinking romance too.
Romance needs that first person, and there are some great stories, like Lauren Kate's Fallen book was first person, pretty sure, or maybe it was her first one, and that worked really well as a fantasy, but again, it was heavy romance. So I was like, oh, that's interesting, and then I thought about doing it, but then I put too much of myself in, and I don't normally do that. And I need that separation between the character, because characters are so much more interesting than I am. And I'm thinking, hold on, I wouldn't necessarily do that. And then I'm thinking, oh, no, hold, what am I doing here? So I have to separate. I it doesn't need to be about me. God, I'm worried.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I mean, yeah, if somebody writes a high fantasy that's in first person, I mean, no judgment. You can make it work any way you want, and I think it'd be great.
That's
But
right.
I just think a certain kind of, like you were saying, a certain kind of personality just isn't given to it quite as much. So it's kind of interesting just to see how different writers handle different stories.
Yeah, and I think like with people putting first person, that might be their strength, and they might not put themselves in it rather than what the hell are you talking about? But for me, I was like, no, it's because it's the I, and then, and like, I'm like, well, the I. What about me? Like I never refer to myself in the third person. It's always I. So then that's where that blur becomes me getting sucked into the story.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting way to look at it.
It's a small trigger, but it's there.
Yeah, that's really interesting way to put it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey as a writer? How did you get into writing, and kind of how did you get where you are today?
So I've been writing for 10 years. I can't believe it's 10 years. It hasn't felt like that long.
Right.
And then even back then I thought to myself, you know what? I don't want to jump into this really quickly. I want to give myself 10 years. So I was a mother of one beautiful hyperactive baby who hated to sleep. and she's the life of the party, and she's still like that now. Nobody has parties until she turns up. So I was a potter. I did pottery, and it was very messy. It takes a long time to set up. It takes a long time to pack up. And when you've got a baby who doesn't want to sleep, and when she does sleep, it was only for like little periods of time. It wasn't practical. So I gave it away, and I just went back into design and drawing, things that I could do that I could just stop and then look after the baby and then come back to. So, but I mean, I think I filled so many notebooks and pads within a couple of weeks, and then I was like, oh, I've got nothing else to draw now. Like, I'm out of ideas. I was creatively burning out. So, you know, as a new mum, we burn out naturally, but as a creative's got to create. And I denied that in myself. So a friend threw a book at me, and I started reading, thinking, I'm not a reader. Like, what are you doing? And she's like, read it. So I was like, okay. And I read the book, and it was Twilight. It was Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. And at the end of the first book, it took me ages to read the first one because I just wasn't used to reading. And at the end of the first one, I started having dreams, like really strong dreams. And it was repetitive, like dreaming the same thing over and over. I thought, all right, maybe if I write it down, then I'll stop dreaming. And that's what happened. So I got into book 2 and book 3. And then by the end of book 4, I read that last book, which was heaps thicker than the first one, 3 times faster than I did with the first one. So I was like, okay. And I was looking for other stories to really dive into. And and I started writing, and that was the bug that got me. So, and it was fantastic because I could read at night, and during the day when she was sleeping, I was like brainstorming and mapping and doing things. And then it was just kind of a journey of having children, studying at uni. I went and studied literature at uni, and just kind of, I found that uni is a great way to learn about other books and how to analyze books, to write books. So I kind of feel like all of the writing things was me putting in all of the extra work at home and diving in and doing everything possibly wrong and then trying to backtrack and redo it. And backtrack and redo it. And so it probably came to writing a lot harder than other people. I don't have that natural thing where I write a sentence and go, wow, it's so poetic. No, I've had to do the whole slog of this is crap, rewrite, crap, rewrite, crap. And that's probably why I wrote Heavy Dirty Soul 30 times. But it was a story I was adamant to get through, and I did it. And it was a story that scared me, so I knew I had to write it. And so,
I love that.
I have just kind of gone out and networked. So I think when I felt comfortable in my writing to share it with people, I went out and met all these writers and developed my own community locally community because we didn't have a writers club. So I was like, right, I'm going to make one. And all these people flocked and it was amazing. So I've been, I find that, you know, writers are so isolated and you know, COVID, like that's so normal now, but pre-COVID, it wasn't normal. So I kind of felt like we're having these communities, finding communities that already exist worldwide. We've got all these amazing writers right around the world that I connect with every single day. And it doesn't feel like it's isolating, because sometimes you get stuck on something and you think, what is wrong with me? Why can't I think? Or I'm just feeling flat, or, you know, and you feel like you might be getting a bit sick and it's like, oh, I don't want to write, but I've got a deadline and this editor's desperate for my next book. Just, you know, so you kind of lean on these people and you say, look, you know, I'm just having a rough day today, and they pick me up and they're fantastic. And then I get back and I'm like, wow, I just wrote 5,000 words. Like,
yeah, you know,
it's great. It's like, it's great community, and even though, you know, the four walls can feel like they're coming in on me sometimes, I feel very connected to the world. I feel like I have a purpose now. So yeah, coming into writing was a very long 10-year journey, but I found that I learnt so much, and giving myself 10 years to develop was the best thing to do. I wouldn't be so confident now if I didn't have all of that knowledge, and just diving into things like archaeology and history and space and all of these other things, which, you know, when you go to uni and they say, you know, you need to stick to your subjects and don't branch out because there's so much in those subjects. I mean, for a writer, you need to be a jack of all trades and master of writing. You don't need to be a master of everything. So yeah, so I've been definitely researching all my books behind me. There's plenty more. So
yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, you just said like 4 things right there that I want to pull out that I just absolutely loved. Well, first of all, you said that you are not as natural at it as most people. I think you'd be surprised. Most people, even people who are really avid readers, they tend to not be. I mean, they can be natural storytellers, but writing is different than storytelling, and so. I don't know, I find that writers, they think because they know what a hero is and they know what a villain is and they know what a climax is, that they can just write, and they kind of don't realize that they need more story craft than that. So you're really not any different than anybody else, I promise.
Yeah, it's not a natural thing, and I think it comes down to me being an artist as a child. Like, I was always surrounded by paint, and I was painting canvases, but I had the television on, and I was always putting movies on, and I didn't care if I watched the same movie 6,000 times. Like, I still do that to this day. I'm like, canvases on, movies on, and I think unconsciously I was because I wasn't watching TV, I was just listening to TV. And I was listening to that story structure. So, and I love movies. I still love movies. My kids love movies. Like, we just always, there's movies. And we're soaking in that story structure. I can hear it unconsciously. So when I read somebody's book and I do structural editing, I'm like, this is a great story. I love these characters and these worlds. But there's something wrong with the structure. I can't hear that story, and that's where I can kind of like pick apart the world and then rebuild it for them and show them, like, okay, this is what has to happen to get in this twist, to get to this point. And it's and I don't think if I had, and you know, a lot of people made fun of me because I was this art kid that sat in the lounge room constantly a mess. My mum would clean up the house and boom, there's me, the mess again. It's just like, 5 minutes, Amanda, please, just clean the house, clean for 5 minutes. I'm like, yeah, but there's art in this movies and I have to do this. And I didn't know why I had to do this, but it was like downloading story structure. So I had that in my blood. And then when I came to writing, it was more about getting the world, so that I think came naturally for me, the writing. It was garbage.
Yep, it's harder. Well, and I really love that you said that you had to write the thing that you were afraid to write. Can you build on that? Is it always important to write the thing you're afraid of writing?
Yeah, look, I wrote a book called Blackout Sun, and that was my first book, and it was me putting myself into the book. So I couldn't even think of a character's name. That's how great I was. So I found that, you know, I was getting comfortable rewriting the same stories, and I had this idea for Ivy, and she's a witch, and I really didn't know about the history of witchcraft. I didn't know about, a lot of things about history. But the problem with Heavy Dirty Soul is it doesn't have a conventional arc. It has a loop, and it loops like this. Mm. And so from a story base, that it's not something that you should do. So what happened was Ivy starts in the 1500s and she's burned at the stake. And during that time, she curses the entire world. And she then dies and reincarnates into 100 years later into a different culture, where she kind of faces the same similar situation where she's being accused of something and she's assassinated or she's murdered or something else. Again, we repeat that loop. And from a structural base, that's like, don't do that. Like, don't keep repeating the same thing. But we're going from different culture, 100 years time, with different characters, except Ivy and her love interest, Thomas, are consistent throughout the lives. Ivy doesn't have the gift of memory, so she repeats these mistakes, but Thomas, who we stick with as our main point of view for most of the book, he has the curse of memory. So we get to carry that through. And then it finishes in the future in an underwater city. So it doesn't have the conventional makeup of a story, and that petrified me. And the whole idea of a different culture, 100 years apart, the research was like, it was horrible. Hence why I had to have so many editors. Because it wasn't a conventional story. It does pushes into the literary form as well. So I had a university teacher who's like, come and do your masters and do a literary book. And I'm like, literary? I don't want to write literary. And then I wrote a literary book. I was like, so it does push out beyond genre. It pushes the story structure. It's very different. But at the same time, it was the story that scared me because I didn't think I would be able to pull it off. And I did it. It wasn't as good. I rewrote it, did it again. And I really dived into what it meant to live in that time and kind of be there and experience it. And before these complications kick in and we repeat it, and it starts to become a nightmare. And then, so yeah, it kind of pulled in a bit of a horror and it's not a horror as in, it's scary and it's these superficial things. It's, oh my God, I'm repeating my life here. And then I'm definitely not repeating. Everything's so different. Wait, no, we're repeating again. So that's what I meant by it. The story that scares you is, you have to, if you can pull it off, you can prove to yourself that you can write.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really great takeaway. So what kind of return did you get on that? I was going to ask you that. Like, I mean, you did prove to yourself that you could write it, obviously, but what other rewards did you get from completing that?
So I find that like if people read Heavy Dirty Soul first, they do jump into the other books and go, yep, it's a quite easy transition. But if you start with the other books and come to Heavy Dirty Soul, it's like, okay, what's going on here? It's so different. The reviews have come back really well, and I find that people with more of a literature background will appreciate it more. It's not a book that I go around recommending, actually, because the thing is, if you can't get through the first chapter, I completely understand, and it's very graphic. So when she is burnt from the stake, I wrote it from a first-person perspective in that chapter. So we really dive into what it's like to be burnt alive, but at the same time, I had to keep her alive in order to get that curse rolling. So in the way that the body burns is, the skin dries out, it breaks, the pus comes through, and that acts like fuel. So I kind of wrote her as like this human candlestick that wouldn't die in order to project the curse and be powerful enough to curse. So it is graphic because, I mean, how many stories do you see we see these witches burning on the stake, but we have that, we are the audience. Right. So putting that point of view, and we're looking out at the the audience and the people who are there and the witnesses, then it puts that reader into an uncomfortable position.
Right.
So I find that a few people are like, this is great storytelling, but I couldn't get past the first chapter. I totally get that. It was very graphic. It was very like full on, and especially it's quite a contrast from her normal life. If she's in there, she's got some love interest, and all these people are like, you know, she's struggling to fit in type of thing. But then you've got this horrific death scenes. It was just like a story that it had to be written. It's done.
Yeah.
I'll never write a story like that again. But yeah, it's out in the world, and I know I totally understand if people can't get to that one. But
yeah,
I have easier stories.
Well, I almost wonder. I mean, because it's kind of cross genre that way, it's probably never not gonna have huge sales. But I mean, you could peddle it to adjacent genres. I mean, I wonder if dark fantasy readers would like it more, or even historical readers that like fantasy, you know, things like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing with speculative fiction, is that we are across genres, and we don't have that wonderful marketing platform of Amazon to say that's spec. Unfortunately, because, you know, depending on each speculative writer is different, but, you know, we really push out of those genres, and it's the balloon of all of these other subgenres. So when you're diving into fantasy or just horror, you know, you're coming from the spec and you're going down. When we jump back up to the spec, we can tap into whatever we need and make that it's whatever the story needs. You pull it in and you make it work. And that's the best thing. Or some people only will work with 2 or 3, maybe 4 genres, and you'll have your main one, and then you just kind of like tack on your smaller ones. But it just depends, and we have no way of marketing these books. We can say, yes, it's a little bit like this. Yes, it's a little bit like that. And then you're like, oh, it's easier to say it's like this book and that book, and then you go, and then a little bit of other books. Because it's not like an A plus B equals C when it comes to marketing. It's, spec fics hard to say this is a book written for itself. I feel like it.
So, I mean, on that subject, do you have any marketing tactics that have worked really well for you, or what is your go-to to market your books?
So I think it's like the publishing often. When I did 2 books in the first year, 2 books in the second, and I'm aiming for 8 next year.
Nice.
Whether I achieve that or not, 8 is an impossible number, but I think I can get there. So I think with publishing often and just interacting with readers, I'm really bad with social media. Like I try and do 1 post a day, but then there'll be like a week or 2 where I haven't posted, and I'm like, oh. And it's not because I'm trying to be antisocial. I like dive into these. Well, I do this. Go into the zone where I forget that time exists, and I have children to feed, and I'm like, wait, I'm writing. I need to dive back out into life. But and then you forget things like social media. So it's kind of a combination of everything. I do have a newsletter. I'm really bad at like keeping up with that as well. But for me, I'm a very, very visual person, and that's why all my book covers are very visual. My author portrait is quite visual. So I really put a lot more effort into my website, because there's something really appealing when you click on a website and you're like, oh, like this, and all the visuals just kind of get you. And I'm not quite a big fan of the stock photos that a lot of people are going for. It's just, I feel like there's this generic feel to them. So I kind of pull away. If you've got books and websites and quite bland, like if you look at Stephen King's website, it's quite bland, and you think, oh yeah, it's full of information. Yes, I'll get the information that I want, but at the same time, I've got no reason to come back and look at that, because I don't feel, right. I don't feel like I'm coming to see anything. I'm just coming to read what I need to get. So I really advocate for a fantastic website.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point. I think if our book covers need to pop to catch attention, then our websites probably should too.
Yeah, and look, a lot of people's book covers it just has to work on their genre and what they're achieving. But from the very beginning, when I was kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to present myself and what am I doing here? I'm very particular on a book cover, which is funny enough. A lot of writers can't write their story without them having a title. I need a whole book cover. I have to have that book. I need to know what visuals I'm working with. And when you read through, you'll have that feel to the book cover, because there's nothing worse than going, I love that book at the bookstore. You pick it up, you go, oh, I need to read this story. This visual art is amazing. And then you're like, that story is nothing like that cover.
Yeah.
No, I'm not like that. So for The Reluctant Wizard, I had that made, and that's my son and my middle child on the cover.
Oh, wow.
I really couldn't find a cover for it, and I kind of knew what I needed from it. I had drafted the story, I'd sent the photos off, and then it came back. Once I saw the throne, I was then able to, in the rewrite, put all of those little elements, and it's very minute, very subtle, the color scheme. So when you see that color, then you go into this world, you've got that visual already there, and you kind of then wash it into the story. And that's how I kind of work with covers. So covers are very important for me. So is my author portrait. That's why it's not the generic, the generic one. And I feel like that's, I think that's probably one of the most underestimated things that we can do as an author and a publisher is those covers. So I mean, it does come down to money. I think J.K. Rowling's new Harry Potter book covers are amazing because they're bringing on artists now, where they've always had these artists, but they're always like, oh yeah, they're nice covers, but then you get that moment where you go, wow, that's an amazing cover. They're the covers that I want.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are kind of running short of time here. We'll probably wrap up, but what advice do you have for other authors or aspiring authors?
Oh, keep writing, head down. It's great to hear other people's advice, but at the same time, you've got to make up your own advice, figure out what works for you, what's important for you. But in the end, I end up making my own advice and then sticking it to that, and that I read back on it about 5 years later, and I find that it's more important than the advice that I got from somebody else. So make your own advice.
Yeah, I think that's super important. So thank you for that. All right, well, thanks for being on the show today. I will link to your book so people can see the cover, since we talked about it, in the show notes. And yeah, thanks so much for being on.
No, thank you.
Yeah, good luck with your writing.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Me again. Before you go, if you found value in this episode, I would love it if you could leave me a review. Reviews are the best way to show your appreciation and help others find this podcast. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your favorite social media network, and tag me at LK Hill Books. Remember, the world needs your stories. Only you can change someone's heart with your fire-breathing dragons, your mind-blowing mysteries, your epic romances, and your intense thrillers. So join the revolution and be a prolific author.